Newfoundland covers 108,860 square kilometers of rock at the edge of the North Atlantic, and almost nothing that makes it remarkable is visible from a map. What follows ranges from geology that changed how science understands the planet to one island holding a large share of an entire species, to a political decision no other modern country has made voluntarily. Some of it is beautiful, some is hard, all of it is verified. Today we're counting down 50 facts that will change how you see Newfoundland. This channel covers geography and natural science in detail. Subscribe if you want more. Let's start with Fact 50. Fact 50. 16th largest on Earth, 108,860 square kilometers. That is the area of Newfoundland, the 16th largest island in the world and Canada's 4th largest. Bigger than Ireland, bigger than Iceland, roughly the size of Tennessee. Population density sits around 4.4 people per square kilometer, and no point on the island lies more than about 100 kilometers from the sea. Everyone lives on the edge. Fact 49. The first sunrise. Capelin sits 12 kilometers from downtown St. John's on a cliff 75 meters above the Atlantic. It is the easternmost point of North America, excluding Greenland, the first place on the continent to see the sun each morning. Stand facing east, and you are closer to Ireland than to Vancouver. Every January 1st, people drive out in the dark to watch the year's first sunrise land here. Fact 48. Where two oceans argue. When people picture Canadian weather, they picture cold. St. John's offers something else. Environment. Canada ranks at first among Canadian cities for wind and fog, with roughly 335 centimeters of snow a year. The cause sits offshore. The frigid Labrador Current running south meets the warm Gulf Stream running north, and warm air over cold water makes fog on an industrial scale. Fact 47. The island that made an inland sea. Every drop of water that passes through the Great Lakes eventually reaches the Atlantic, and Newfoundland is in the way. The island sits across the mouth of the St. Lawrence, and by blocking it, creates the Gulf of St. Martin. Lawrence, described as the world's largest estuary, roughly 236,000 to 250,000 square kilometers. It drains through two gaps, both are beside Newfoundland. Fact 46. Coastline beyond reason. 29,000 kilometers. That is the official coastline figure for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, long enough to cross North America 4 times and come back. It comes from extreme indentation. Thousands of bays, coves, tickles, and fjords, glacier carved and then drowned. That shape is why the fishery worked. Every few kilometers offered a sheltered anchorage. Fact 45. Dildo, come by chance, blow me down. Dildo sits on Trinity Bay, 60 kilometers west of St. John's, and the name is attested here from at least 1711. The leading explanation is an old nautical term for the wooden peg in a boat's rigging. The map is full of this, come by chance, Heart's Desire, Joe Bat's Arm. More than 20 localities are called Blow Me Down. An arm is an inlet, a tickle is a narrow channel. Navigational, not comic. Fact 44. The half-hour time zone. Watch Canadian television long enough and you hear the tell. Coming up at 6:30 in Newfoundland. Newfoundland Standard Time is UTC minus 3:30, the only half-hour zone in North America. St. John sits at almost exactly 52.5 degrees west, the precise meridian for that offset, so the clocks match the sun. Governments proposed abolishing it in 1951 and 1963. The public refused twice. Fact 43. Travel west and your watch should go back. Off Newfoundland's south coast, it goes forward. The French islands of St-Pierre and Miquelon, a short crossing from the Bering Peninsula, run on UTC minus 3, half an hour ahead. Continue west to Cape Breton and you drop a full hour. One direction of travel. Watch forward, then back. Fact 42. 500,000 puffins. More than 260,000 breeding pairs. That is the Atlantic puffin population of the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, 4 small islands south of St. John's, the largest puffin colony in North America. Add 620,000 pairs of leeches, storm petrels, and the total approaches 4 million seabirds in a season. On rocks a boat can circle in an afternoon. The puffins nest underground. Fact 41. 30,000 gannets on one rock, Cape St. Mary's on the southwestern Avalon Peninsula, ends in a sandstone sea stack 100 meters tall. Bird Rock holds more than 24,000 northern gannets, reported as the 3rd largest colony of the species in North America. What is unusual is the access, a chasm a few meters wide, separates the viewing area from the birds. No boat, no telescope. Gannets 10 meters away. Fact 40. Whales following a small fish. Every July, Capelin, a fish the length of a hand, roll onto Newfoundland beaches to spawn in numbers that turn the shoreline silver. Humpback whales follow. Stable isotope analysis of humpbacks feeding off the northeast coast found Capelin made up roughly 90% of their diet, and researchers tracked whale aggregations arriving in each bay 8 to 20 days behind the fish. People wade in with buckets. 40-ton animals feed a few hundred meters out. Fact 39. 10,000-year-old ice. Around 40,000 icebergs calve from Greenland's glaciers every year. Between 400 and 800 drift far enough south to pass Newfoundland, crossing 48 degrees north along the stretch called Iceberg Alley. The ice is roughly 10,000 years old. Counts swing violently. More than 1,500 crossed that line in 2019, and in 2021, exactly 1. The International Ice Patrol has counted them since 1913. Fact 38. Mountains older than the Rockies. The long-range mountains run up Newfoundland's western side, the northern end of the Appalachian chain. Their core is gneiss and granite, dating to roughly 1.2 billion years. The eroded roots of a range once Himalayan in scale raised long before the Appalachians existed. The Canadian Rockies are younger by close to 1 billion years. The island's high point now reaches 814 meters. That is what survived. Fact 37. 9,000 to a few hundred. Tractors did what wolves and winters could not. The Newfoundland pony, brought by English and Irish settlers from the 17th century onward, numbered around 9,000 in 1935. Mechanization ended its usefulness. A ban on free-roaming livestock ended how it was kept, and dealers shipped ponies off the island for meat. A few hundred survive worldwide. In 1997, it became the province's only protected heritage animal. Fact 36. The wolf that vanished. Around 1930, the last of Newfoundland's wolves disappeared, and that single extinction is why the island now has a moose problem. Moose arrived in 1904, and with the wolf gone, nothing preyed on adults. Black bears take calves, not full-grown animals. By 1935, moose had spread across most of the island. Managers now do the predator's job by committee. 28,705 licenses for the 2026-27 season. Fact 35. Runways too big for the town. Gander International Airport has 2 runways, one 10,200 feet long and one 8,900, serving a town of about 10,000. The scale is a leftover. Early aircraft could not cross the Atlantic without refueling, and Newfoundland is the closest North American land to Europe, so Gander became the stop everyone made. Jets made it redundant. The traffic left. The runways stayed. The letter S. On the 12th of December, 1901, on a hill above St. John's Harbor, Guglielmo Marconi reported hearing 3 faint clicks in a headset. The Morse letter S, sent from Cornwall, about 3,400 kilometers away. The antenna was a wire held up by a kite. Physicists expected radio waves to travel straight and shoot off over the curve of the Earth. This suggested otherwise and pointed toward the ionosphere. The signal was unrecorded and never independently witnessed. Historians still argue about it. Fact 33. 16 hours to Ireland. 16 hours and 27 minutes. That is how long John Alcock and Arthur Whitten Brown spent in the air on the first non-stop flight across the Atlantic, leaving a cleared field outside St. John's on the 14th of June, 1919, and landing nose down in an Irish bog the next morning. 8 years before Lindbergh, their runway was 500 yards long, fences pulled down and boulders blasted to make it usable. They navigated by sextant. Fact 32. The Titanic called Newfoundland. The Marconi station at Cape Race sat on a fog-bound headland at the southeastern tip of the Avalon Peninsula. At 10:25 in the evening on the 14th of April 1912, it picked up the Titanic's distress call from roughly 400 nautical miles away, the closest land station and the first anywhere to respond. Minutes earlier, the Titanic's operator had brushed off an ice warning from a nearby ship for drowning out the faint Cape Race signal. Fact 31. 2 weeks to 2 minutes. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, the official dispatch took 11 days to reach the American minister in London. Then, on the 27th of July, 1866, the SS Great Eastern came out of thick fog into a Newfoundland village called Heart's Content, trailing 2,730 nautical miles of cable back to Ireland. The first permanent transatlantic telegraph link was ashore. Weeks became minutes. The station ran for 99 years. Fact 30. A holiday decided by weather. Most civic holidays are fixed to a date. St. John's decides its by looking at the water. The Royal St. John's Regatta, believed to be the oldest continuously running sporting event in North America, has documented races back to the 12th of August, 1816, and an organized regatta from 1818, 51 years before Canada existed. It draws up to 50,000 people to Quidi Vidi Lake. If the lake is too rough, the races are postponed. So is the day off. Fact 29, 9 minutes, 13 seconds. 9 minutes, 13 3/4 seconds. 6 fishermen from Outer Cove rode that time at the Regatta on the 7th of August, 1901, in a boat called the Blue Peter. No crew beat it for 80 years. Through 2 world wars and the entire invention of modern sports science. Until 1981. Families in Outer Cove began carving the time onto the crew's gravestones. That cemetery is still filling with them. Fact 28. 77,000 words left over. Newfoundland English is distinct enough to have its own scholarly dictionary. It appeared in 1982 after 2 decades of research, runs to roughly 770 pages, and has been reprinted 17 times. More telling is what did not fit. Over 77,000 collected words were left out and archived at Memorial University. Hundreds of isolated outports, each developed on their own for centuries. Fact 27. 76 centimeters in a day. 76.2 centimeters of snow fell at St. John's International Airport on the 17th of January 2020, the highest daily total since records began there in 1942. Mount Pearl took 93. The strongest gust measured 171 kilometers per hour, past hurricane force. The city stayed under a state of emergency for 8 days, and roughly 380 Canadian Armed Forces personnel deployed to dig residents out of their houses. Fact 26. The human wind gauge. Wreckhouse is a flat, barren strip between the Long-Range Mountains and the sea at the island's southwestern corner. Storm winds funnel through the mountain gaps and accelerate, gusting past 160 kilometers per hour. The railway paid a local trapper, Lachlan McDougall, $20 a month to phone in wind warnings, a job he held for about 30 years. On the one occasion a conductor ignored him, 22 rail cars went off the tracks. Fact 25. Mining under the ocean. Miners on Bell Island worked outward rather than downward. Tunnels from the number Two mine ran kilometers out beneath the floor of Conception Bay, in rooms 4 meters wide and 4 high, with pillars of ore left standing to hold up the roof, and, above it, the sea. The mines produced over 80 million tons. When the pumps went off in 1949, everything below level 23 flooded. It is still flooded. Which of these has surprised you most so far? Drop it in the comments, we read every one. The second half gets heavier. 2. Submarine attacks, a wave that crossed the entire Atlantic, and the moment a country voted itself out of existence. Fact 24. Torpedoed in North America. Bell Island's iron ore-fed steel mills in Nova Scotia, and before the war, Germany had been one of its biggest customers. In 1942, German submarines came back. 2.113 sank 2 ore carriers. On the 5th of September, U-118 sank 2 more on the 2nd of November, and a missed torpedo blew a hole in the Scotia Pier. 4 ships lost at anchor, roughly 70 men killed. Fact 23. The ferry that never arrived. That is how many died. When the passenger ferry SS Caribou was torpedoed at 3:51 in the morning on the 14th of October 1942, about 37 kilometers southwest of Port aux Basques. She sank in 5 minutes. Of the 237 aboard, 57 were military personnel, 49 civilians, and 31 crew. 10 were children. Captain Benjamin Taverner died along with both his sons, who served as his first and third officers. Fact 22. A corner of the flat Earth. Brimstone Head rises 103 meters above Fogo Island, off the northeast coast, and a sign at the summit identifies it as one of the 4 corners of the flat Earth. The designation came from the Flat Earth Society of Canada in the 1970 seconds, founded by a philosopher, a poet, and a writer as deliberate satire. An exercise in teaching people to question authority. Is about critical thinking. Fact 21. 40% of a species. Roughly 40% of every leech's storm petrel alive on Earth was born on one Newfoundland island. Baccalieu Island, about 5 kilometers long, holds the largest colony of the species anywhere, plus the greatest diversity of breeding seabirds in eastern North America. The petrels come ashore only in full darkness. At night, the island is invisible and audible. Hundreds of thousands of birds churring underground beneath your feet. Fact 20. An island missing its animals. Visitors expect a wilderness full of animals. Newfoundland has 14 native land mammal species and no native reptiles or amphibians at all. Labrador, across a strait, has around 42 mammals. Glaciation scoured the island clean, and recolonizing it meant swimming, flying, or crossing winter sea ice, which hibernating animals cannot do while asleep. No snakes, no frogs, no porcupines or skunks. Almost everything else a visitor sees arrived in a crate. Fact 19. A lake below sea level. Western Brook Pond in Grossmoor National Park is 16 kilometers long, 165 meters deep, walled by cliffs up to 600 meters high. It was carved as a true fjord, open to the ocean. Then the land, released from the weight of the ice, rebounded and sealed the mouth. More than 60% of its volume sits below sea level, and the water is entirely fresh. Locally, it is a pond. Fact 18. The original penguin. The word penguin belonged to another bird first. The great auk stood about 75 centimeters tall, could not fly, and had its largest known colony on Funk Island, roughly 60 kilometers off the northeast coast, a place sailors called Penguin Island. A 1718 account described birds packed so tightly a man could not put a foot between them. Crews drove them up gangplanks into ships' holds. The last confirmed pair was killed in Iceland in 1844. Fact 17. 250 towns erased. Over 250 communities. That is how many Newfoundland outports were abandoned between 1954 and 1975, as government resettlement relocated roughly 30,000 people. The logic was cost. Settlements reachable only by boat were expensive to supply with schools, power, and medicine. Rather than leave their houses, many families jacked them off the foundations, floated them, and towed them across open bays at walking pace. Fact 16. Youngest to oldest in 20 years. In 1996, Newfoundland and Labrador was the youngest province in Canada, with a median age of 34.1. By 2021, it was the oldest, at 48. The cod fishery closed and young adults left, removing the current workforce and the future births at once. Provincial births fell from over 15,000 a year in the mid-1960s to 3,418 in 2025. In many outports, the school closed before the church did. Fact 15. The newest province, the oldest colony. 1949. That is when Newfoundland became a Canadian province, 82 years after Confederation, the newest province in the country, and simultaneously the site of the oldest European presence in the Americas. Before 1949, it was a self-governing dominion with its own currency, stamps, flag, and prime minister, and it fought the First World War as a separate country. People are still alive who were born in a country that no longer exists in the house they live in now. Fact 14. The town that doubled. Gander population, roughly 10,000, took in 38 wide-body jets on the 11th of September 2001 when American airspace closed. Around 6,500 passengers and crew came off them, a population increase of 2/3 overnight, in a town with nowhere near enough hotel rooms. Schools, legion halls, and private homes opened. Striking bus drivers went back to work voluntarily. The jet sat wingtip to wingtip. Fact 13. 4 moose, 100,000. 4 moose, 2 bulls, and 2 cows released near Howley in 1904 as a reliable meat source. The island now holds between 110,000 and 120,000 of their descendants, about 1 per square kilometer, the highest density in Canada. New Brunswick, second, has 0.41. Between 2012 and 2020, Newfoundland averaged 539 moose vehicle collisions a year. A bull weighs up to 1,200 pounds and stands tall enough to come through a windshield rather than under a bumper. Fact 12. Canada's deadliest tsunami. On the 18th of November, 1929, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck offshore, and 2.5 hours later, the sea arrived on the Boran Peninsula in 3 pulses, each reaching further inland than the last. Run-up reached 13 meters at the heads of the narrow bays. 28 people died across more than 40 communities, the deadliest earthquake-related event in Canadian history. The only telegraph line off the peninsula had failed shortly before the quake, so no word got out for 3 days. The water did not only smash buildings, it floated them. One general store was carried 60 meters inland and set down in a meadow, its stock still on the shelves. Fact 11. The landslide that taught us turbidity. The same earthquake did something larger, and nobody saw it. At least 100 cubic kilometers of sediment failed on the Laurentian slope, generating a turbidity current that ran up to 1,000 kilometers east at an estimated 60 to 100 kilometers an hour, severing 12 transatlantic cables one after another. Each break carried a timestamp. 2 decades later, scientists worked backwards from that list and calculated the speed of an underwater avalanche for the first time. Fact 10. 30,000 jobs one day. The 2nd of July, 1992. On that day, Canada closed the northern cod fishery, ending an industry that had run for nearly 500 years and putting roughly 30,000 people out of work. Widely described as the largest industrial mass layoff in the country's history. The spawning biomass had fallen about 93% in 3 decades, from 1.6 million tons in 1962 to between 72,000 and 110,000. Meant to last 2 years, it lasted 32. Cabot's crews in 1497 reportedly lowered baskets over the side and hauled them up full of cod. Fact 9. Canada by 7,000 votes. Newfoundland nearly stayed a country. In the referendum of the 22nd of July, 1948, Confederation with Canada won 78,323 votes against 71,334. A margin of 6,989 or 4.6 percentage points. Fewer than 7,000 votes decided whether Canada would have 10 provinces or 9. It took 2 ballots. The first produced no majority, and a third faction had campaigned for economic union with the United States. Newfoundland joined on the 31st of March, 1949. Fact 8. The country that quit democracy. Most countries lose their democracy. Newfoundland handed its own back. In 1933, the Parliament voted itself out of existence, and on the 16th of February 1934, an unelected commission of government, 6 appointed commissioners, took over a population of roughly 280,000. It governed for 15 years. The cause was debt, a railway, the First World War, then the Depression. A British Royal Commission concluded the people needed a rest from politics for a period of years. Fact 7. The last of her people. Shanawdithit was the last known surviving Beothuk. She died of tuberculosis in St. John's on the 6th of June, 1829, aged about 28. When she was captured 6 years earlier, fewer than a dozen of her people were known to be alive. The Beothuk had withdrawn inland as settlement took the coast, cutting them off from the marine food they depended on. Starvation, disease, and violence did the rest. In her final year, she translated words, drew tools and dwellings, and illustrated encounters between her people and settlers. Almost everything known about Beothuk culture comes from that 1 year. The location of her grave is unknown. Fact 6. 68 answered. 68 men. That is how many answered roll call on the 2nd of July 1916, out of some 800 from the Newfoundland Regiment who went forward at Beaumont-Hamel the morning before. The attack lasted under 30 minutes. Every officer who advanced became a casualty, the highest unit casualty rate of that day, on a day when the British Army took more than 57,000. The dead included 14 sets of brothers. Newfoundland was not part of Canada then. It had gone to war as a separate dominion. There, the 1st of July is Memorial Day. Fact 5. A half-billion-year coastline. 3 globally significant geological sites sit within a few hundred kilometers of each other here. The oldest known fossils of large, complex life, the reference point defining the base of the Ordovician, and an exposed slab of the Earth's mantle. Add Lonso Meadows, the only authenticated Norse site in the Americas. Newfoundland sits on the seam where an ancient ocean closed, scoured by glaciers and stripped bare by weather. Deep rock keeps surfacing. Fact 4. Where the Ordovician begins. Greenpoint in Grossmoor National Park is where the Ordovician period officially begins. Geologic time is not defined by a number. It is defined by a place, and the global reference point for the base of the Ordovician, ratified in 2000, sits in the rock here, marked by the first appearance of a conodont called Iapatognathus fluctivagus. The layers stand nearly vertical. You read the time by walking sideways along the shore. Fact 3. Walking on Earth's mantle. The Tablelands look like a piece of Mars dropped into western Newfoundland. Rust orange, bare, a few kilometers from green fjords. What you walk on is the Earth's mantle. Ultramafic peridotite, normally sitting 10 kilometers or more beneath the ocean floor, was pushed on top of the continent roughly 470 million years ago as the Iapetus Ocean closed. Mapping it fed directly into the theory of plate tectonics. The rock is chemically hostile to plants. That is why nothing grows. Fact 2. The oldest big life. 565 million years. That is the age of the seafloor preserved at Mistaken Point on the southeastern tip of the Avalon Peninsula. The oldest known fossils of large complex organisms anywhere on Earth. More than 10,000 impressions across a 17-kilometer strip of cliff, buried instantly beneath volcanic ash. They arrive after roughly 3 billion years in which life was essentially microbial. Visitors cross the fossil surface in their socks, the Atlantic breaking directly below. Fact 1. Vikings dated to 1021. In the year 993, a solar storm flooded Earth's atmosphere with radiocarbon, leaving an identical chemical mark in tree rings from Germany to Ireland to Arizona to Japan. 1,000 years later, researchers found that mark inside wood from the Norse layer at Lonso Meadow on Newfoundland's northern tip and counted the rings outward to the bark. 28 of them. Europeans were felling trees in North America in 1021. Not a range, a single year, 471 years before Columbus. The evidence is a discarded scrap of fir and juniper thrown away by someone trimming a log and preserved in wet peat. The tool marks are still crisp. 108,860 square kilometers at the edge of the Atlantic, and the number means something different now. One island holding the oldest complex life on Earth, the exposed mantle of the planet, and the first European foothold in the Americas. My favorite is Fact 11. 12 dead telegraph cables in a filing cabinet turned out to be a stopwatch on an avalanche nobody witnessed. Which fact surprised you most? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more geography and natural science.